Hey guys, tonight we're trading modern life for the windswept tundra of 17th century Iceland, where you're about to experience the thrilling life of a goose herder. That's right, while everyone else gets to be knights or philosophers in historical fantasies, you've drawn the short straw of guarding irritable waterfowl across volcanic wastelands. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love imagining all of you drifting off to tailies of ornery geese across different time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Dawn cracks across the horizon like an egg with a particularly stubborn shell. You blink awake in your turf hut, a cozy 8 by 8 foot space that smells like damp wool, smoked fish, and the unmistakable musk of unwashed herder. That's you. The walls, made of stacked sod blocks, sweat condensation that plinks into strategically placed buckets. Outside, your alarm clock is going off. About 200 geese honking what sounds suspiciously like a Viking war chant. You wriggle out from under your sheepskin blanket. Historians still argue whether these were actually warm or just heavy, immediately banging your head on the low doorway. This isn't clumsiness. Turf huts had intentionally low entrances to keep heat in and trolls out, though mostly it just kept tall herders humble. As you stumble into the gray morning light, your bare feet meet volcanic gravel that instantly reminds you why Icelanders invented wool socks. The air smells like sulfur and impending regret. Somewhere in the distance, a geyser erupts, because Iceland loves dramatic punctuation. Your geese eye you with a judgmental stare only animals that outnumber you 200 to 1 can muster. Your stomach growls louder than the distant geysers as you face the most dangerous challenge of the day: breakfast. The kitchen is just a corner of the hut with a small hearth, currently occupied by a pot of something that smells suspiciously like a chemistry experiment gone wrong. You lift the lid to reveal your morning feast: chunks of fermented shark steeping in whey. Its ammonia-rich aroma making your eyes water like you've just been pepper sprayed by a very disappointed grandmother. Historians still argue whether this was actually nutritious or just an elaborate Viking-era hazing ritual. Beside it sits a crock of butter so ancient it's developed its own ecosystem. The white patina on top isn't mold. It's protective aging, or so you tell yourself as you scrape it onto your rye flatbread. The first bite is an experience. The shark meat attacks your taste buds with the ferocity of a miniature Ragnarok, while the butter adds a creamy note. This might be older than the sagas. You chase it with a swig of skyr, the Viking answer to yogurt, except thicker, sourer, and somehow more judgmental of your life choices. Outside, the geese begin their morning protest, banging their beaks against the turf walls like tiny, feathered debt collectors. You sigh and grab your herding stick, a gnarled length of driftwood that's seen more battles than some swords. As you step back into the crisp air, a particularly bold gander eyes your breakfast with clear intent. Try it. You dare him, holding out a piece of shark. He takes one sniff, makes a noise like a deflating bagpipe, and waddles away in disgust. Even 17th century geese had standards. The morning sun stretches across the lava fields as you face your battalion of feathered subordinates. 200 pairs of beady eyes lock onto you with the collective intelligence of a very fluffy mob. The lead gander, you've nicknamed him Erik the Red for his temper and rust-colored feathers, lets out a derisive honk that sounds suspiciously like laughter. You raise your herding stick like a scepter, attempting to project authority. The geese remain unimpressed. A daring juvenile nips at your wool leggings, testing your resolve. Historians still argue whether Icelandic geese were particularly aggressive, or if the herders just liked to embellish their sagas. With a resigned sigh, you begin the daily migration toward the grazing grounds, a process that resembles less an orderly march and more a feathery riot in slow motion. The terrain fights you at every step. Moss-covered lava rocks shift treacherously underfoot, while hidden hot springs send up sudden jets of steam that startle both herder and geese alike. Erik the Red takes particular delight in leading stragglers through patches of prickly thrift flowers, forcing you into awkward ballet leaps to avoid the spiny vegetation. Halfway to the pasture, you notice the flock has mysteriously doubled in size. A quick head count reveals the extra geese are actually just tufts of wool grass, caught in the breeze, a trick of the landscape that fools you at least once a week. The real geese honk in what can only be described as avian mockery as you sheepishly return to formation. By the time you reach the grazing grounds, the sun sits high enough to warm your back, but not warm enough to melt the perpetual chill in your toes. The geese immediately begin gorging on tender grasses, momentarily forgetting their mission to make your life difficult. You lean against a basalt column, catching your breath and watching steam rise from a distant hot spring. Nature's way of reminding you that in Iceland, even the ground needs to vent its frustrations. The wind shifts abruptly, carrying the scent of salt from the distant fjord and something ominous. You squint at the horizon, where clouds the color of bruised whale fat are gathering with malicious intent. Your left knee, which has always been better at predicting storms than the village elder's arthritic fingers, begins its telltale ache. You pluck a strand of goose down from your sleeve and toss it into the air. Instead of floating gently downward, it shoots sideways like a tiny feathered arrow, embedding itself in a patch of moss 3 paces away. Historians still argue whether Icelandic herders actually used this method or just enjoyed watching fluff. Defy physics. The message is clear. Trouble's coming faster than a hungry fox to an unguarded nest. Erik the Red senses it too. His usual strut falters as he cranes his neck skyward, emitting a low warning gurgle that sends ripples through the flock. The geese instinctively huddle together, their usual bravado replaced by tense silence, the avian equivalent of soldiers, hearing distant thunder and realizing they forgot their shields. You weigh your options. Attempt to outrun the storm or seek shelter in the nearby lava tube cave. The cave means possibly disturbing the hidden people, Iceland's version of elves, but more bureaucratic about real estate, while racing home risks losing geese to panic or opportunistic foxes. As the first icy raindrops begin their reconnaissance mission, you make the call heard then toward the cave and deal with the supernatural consequences later. The geese surprisingly comply, moving with uncharacteristic discipline. Even Erik the Red refrains from his usual sabotage, though you catch him shooting you a look that clearly says, "We'll discuss your leadership failures after we survive this." The lava tube cave yawns before you like a giant stone throat, exhaling a damp, mineral-scented breath that makes the geese's feathers ruffle in protest. As you usher the flock inside, the last rays of sunlight illuminate thousands of tiny spiderwebs, strung across the ceiling like nature's cabweeded chandeliers. Historians still argue whether these were considered good luck or just Iceland's version of watch your head signs. Erik the Red hesitates at the threshold, his webbed feet doing an anxious tap dance on the basalt. It takes 3 attempts and a well-aimed pebble behind him before he finally waddles in with all the dignity of a deposed monarch entering exile. The other geese follow, their honks echoing off the curved walls in a bizarre avian symphony that sounds suspiciously like they're mocking the acoustics. You count heads by the dim light filtering through the cave's skylights, natural holes where the lava tube's roof collapsed centuries ago. The numbers don't add up. After a panicked recount, you spot the missing trio huddled near the entrance, refusing to budge because someone, probably Erik, has convinced them the cave is actually the mouth of a giant troll. A thunderclap shakes the ground, settling the debate. The geese practically teleport to the back of the cave in a flurry of wings and indignant squawks. You smile smugly until realizing you're now trapped between 200 nervous geese and a growing puddle of cave drip water that smells suspiciously like sulfur. The storm rages outside, its fury muted to a distant growl within the cave. The geese gradually relax into a feathery carpet of contented gurgles. Even Erik seems momentarily pacified, though you catch him side-eyeing a particularly troll-shaped rock formation. You lean back against the cave wall, listening to the rhythmic plink of water droplets and the geese's synchronized, breathing nature's original white noise machine. The storm's tantrum eventually wears itself out, leaving behind air so crisp it feels like the world itself took a cold shower. You emerge from the cave to find the landscape transformed, every basalt column and grass tuft glittering with raindrops, the low sun turning each one into a tiny prism. Even the geese seem momentarily awed, their usual snark replaced by quiet contemplation as they shake water from their feathers in synchronized little spasms. Your stomach interrupts the moment with a growl loud enough to startle a nearby ptarmigan. Lunchtime. You reach for your ration pouch, only to find its contents have morphed into what can generously be described as seasoned bread, the rain having blended your rye flatbread with pocket lint and a suspicious amount of cave dust into a doughy paper mache. Historians still argue whether this counted as Iceland's first fusion cuisine. The geese, meanwhile, are delighting in post-storm delicacies worms flushed to the surface, tender new grass shoots, and unfortunately, several species of particularly vibrant mushrooms. You rush to shoo Erik away from a neon orange fungus that looks less like food and more like something that would glow in a wizard's basement. He protests with a mouthful of spores, his beak now stained the color of a bad sunset, and waddles off in a huff. You settle on a relatively dry rock to eat your enhanced bread, chasing it with a handful of crowberries, so tart they make your eyelids flutter. The geese gradually disperse across the meadow, their earlier unity forgotten in favor of petty squabbles over prime grazing spots. A young gander attempts to court a disinterested female by presenting her with a particularly slimy worm, the 17th century equivalent of showing off his sports car. She pecks him sharply on the head and steals his worm anyway. As the sun climbs higher, steam begins rising from the geothermal areas across the valley, creating the illusion of distant, smoldering battles. You stretch out on the warming rock, listening to the geese's contented murmurs and the occasional plop of a raindrop falling from a grass blade. Just another peaceful afternoon in Iceland, if you ignore the fact that Erik is now glowing faintly orange around the beak. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the lava field as you begin the most dangerous mission of the day, egg collection. It's a task that requires the stealth of a Viking scout, the reflexes of a sword fighter, and the pain tolerance of a berserker. The geese have scattered their nests cleverly across the terrain, some tucked between basalt columns, others hidden in tall grass that tickles your ankles as you creep forward. You spot your first target, a perfect bowl of down feathers cradling 3 ivory eggs. As you reach out, a hiss from your left reveals the nest's guardian, a gander with a murderous glint in its beady eyes. Historians still argue whether Icelandic geese were actually more aggressive, or if the 17th century just had weaker personal injury laws. The bird charges, wings spread like tiny battering rams, and you barely manage to grab 2 eggs before retreating with your dignity and fingers intact. The next nest appears unguarded, a rookie mistake you should know better than to trust. Just as your fingers brush the eggs, an angry face erupts from beneath the down like a feathered jack-in-the-box. You yelp, the mother goose shrieks, and suddenly you're in the middle of an avian wrestling match where all the moves are pecks and wing slaps. By the time you've filled your basket, you've collected 7 eggs, 3 new bruises, and what will certainly become an entertaining scar on your thumb. The geese watch your retreat with smug satisfaction, already rearranging their remaining eggs and probably plotting better ambush for tomorrow. As you walk away, you swear you hear Erik laughing, a sound like a rusty hinge being tortured. The setting sun paints the sky in shades of fire and molten silver as you trudge toward home, your basket of eggs carefully balanced against your hip. The geese trail behind in a loose formation, their earlier hostility softened by full bellies and the golden light. Even Erik the Red has mellowed, his usual strut reduced to a contented waddle, though he still manages to peck at your heels whenever you slow down. You pass the village's feather house, a small stone building where the day's plunder is sorted and stored. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of down and the soft rustle of feathers being braided by elderly women with fingers as precise as scales. Your meager contribution, 7 eggs and a handful of loose plumage, earns you a nod from the feather mistress, whose spectacles perch on her nose like a bird ready to take flight. Historians still argue whether the feather trade was Iceland's first true export economy or just a happy accident of grumpy geese. The value of each plume is carefully recorded in a ledger older than your grandfather's stories. Prime breast down softer than a cloud's whisper fetches enough to buy a week's worth of rye. Flight feathers become quills for scribes across Europe. Even the coarse tail feathers have their purpose, stuffed into mattresses for wealthy merchants who'll never know they're sleeping on Icelandic goose temper tantrums. As you leave, you spot the village children playing with discarded feathers, blowing them into the air and chasing the floating fluff with shrieks of delight. One feather drifts toward you, catching the last light like a piece of the sunset itself. You tuck it behind your ear, a small trophy from another day, survived in the service of waterfowl. The fox tracks appear like a whispered threat in the damp soil near the stream, fresh paw prints, pressed deep enough to suggest the predator isn't just passing through. You freeze, your breath hanging in the cooling air as your eyes trace the trail leading toward the grazing grounds, where your geese still obliviously preen. Icelandic foxes move like smoke on the wind one moment they're not there. The next they're right beside you, grinning with all the guilt of a child caught with jam-stained fingers. Historians still argue whether these foxes were truly cunning, or if the geese were just spectacularly bad at self-preservation. You tighten your grip on the herding stick, its notched surface telling the story of previous encounters in a language of chips and scars. Erik the Red notices your tension first. His head snaps up, neck feathers bristling, as he emits a low warning growl that would do a guard dog proud. The flock responds instantly, herding the goslings to the center of a protective circle with military precision. It's moments like these you remember why your ancestors called geese feathered hounds. Their eyesight is sharper than a scholar's quill, and their alarm system puts castle guards to shame. You creep forward, following the tracks to a cluster of boulders where the red fur blends perfectly with the rust-colored lichen. A pair of amber eyes glints from the shadows, sizing you up with unsettling intelligence. For a long moment, predator and protector lock gazes, then with a flick of its bushy tail, the fox melts back into the landscape, leaving only the faintest indentation in the moss where it had crouched. The geese remain vigilant long after the danger has passed, their soft murmurs carrying across the twilight like veterans recounting a narrow escape. You lean against a rock, watching the first stars appear between scudding clouds, grateful that tonight, at least, the only casualty is your peace of mind. The midnight sun hangs low on the horizon like a drowsy eye refusing to close as you begin the evening head count. 200 geese should be milling about the stone enclosure, but your tally comes up short by 3. Erik the Red watches from atop a boulder with what you swear is amusement, his orange beak tilted in avian judgment. You grab your lantern, its fish oil flame sputtering protest as you trek back across the cooling lava fields. The missing trio consists of your boldest escape artists, a gander with a crooked toe who nonetheless outruns everyone, his favorite hen, and their incorrigible offspring basically the Houdinis of waterfowl. Historians still argue whether geese truly understood enclosure concepts or just enjoyed watching humans play hide and seek. Your search takes you to the lagoon, where steam rises from geothermal springs in ghostly tendrils. There, floating serenely like feathered nobles at a spa, are your missing birds. They've discovered the warmest pool and show zero remorse for the hour you've wasted tracking them. The young one actually paddles closer and honks directly in your face, its breath smelling suspiciously of the wild thyme growing near the hot springs. After much splashing, cursing, the geese curse back in their own way, and one near miss with a slippery rock, you finally heard the escapees home. The walk back is soundtracked by their disgruntled muttering and the distant gurgle of hot springs, nature's version of a running commentary on your herding skills. As you secure the enclosure gate, Erik lets out a long-suffering honk that perfectly translates to amateur. You're too tired to argue. Above you, the sun finally dips below the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of lavender and bruised peach Iceland's way of apologizing for its troublesome wildlife. The communal fire pit crackles with driftwood salvaged from distant shores, its smoke curling upward to join the stars now piercing the twilight. You settle onto a worn bench beside other herders, passing a horn of something that smells potent enough to sterilize medical equipment. Tonight's storyteller is Old John, whose beard could comfortably house several nesting birds, and whose tailies grow taller with each sip of brew. Ah, the great goose uprising of 1612, John begins, his voice gravelly as the lava fields. 200 geese held the high ground for 3 days straight. Took every herder from here to Akureyri to negotiate their surrender. He pauses dramatically. And the terms were harsh double rations of barley for a fortnight. Historians still argue whether this actually happened, or if John once had a particularly bad hangover during molting season. You nurse your drink a liquid the color of despair that tastes like fermented bog water with delusions of grandeur while swapping your own modest tailies. Your story about Erik's mushroom incident earns appreciative chuckles, though the more experienced herders nod knowingly. Aye, the orange ones make their droppings glow too, remarks one grizzled woman. Pretty as the northern lights, if you don't mind cleaning it off your boots for a week. As the night deepens, the conversation turns to legendary herders of yore like Sigrid the Stubborn, who allegedly herded geese while in labor, and young Julie, who trained a gander to deliver messages, until the bird developed political opinions and refused. The fire pops, sending up a shower of sparks that mingle briefly with the stars before winking out. Your eyelids grow heavy, the day's exhaustion seeping into your bones along with the mead's warmth. Erik's distant honk from the enclosure serves as both reminder and reprimand. Dawn comes early, and geese have no patience for human hangovers. You raise the horn in silent toast to your feathered overlords before staggering toward bed, the stars above spinning gently like a celestial mobile. The first hints of dawn creep across the sky like spilled milk as you shuffle toward the goose enclosure, your head throbbing in time with last night's drinking songs. Erik greets you with a derisive honk, perfectly pitched to feel like an ice pick to the temples. The other geese join in, creating a cacophony that would make a Valkyrie wince nature's most effective alarm clock, if your goal is to never sleep again. You fumble with the gate latch, fingers stiff from the morning chill and last night's poor decisions. The geese surge forward in a feathery tsunami, nearly knocking you into a puddle that smells suspiciously of fermented regret. Historians still argue whether Viking-era hangover cures actually worked, or just made you forget you were hungover through sheer trauma. You make a mental note to ask Old John what was in that horn right after you're done praying for death. Breakfast is a solemn affair, stale rye bread dunked in weak ale, the 17th century equivalent of greasy spoon diner coffee. The bread sops up both liquid and your will to live, leaving behind a soggy mass that sits in your stomach like a lead fishing weight. Even the fermented shark seems to eye you with pity this morning. The geese, sensing weakness, become extra bold. A juvenile gander steals your hat right off your head, leaving you on a stumbling chase across the dew-slick grass. You recover it eventually, though now adorned with a suspicious green stain and what looks like bite marks. Erik watches the entire debacle with the quiet judgment of a feathered drill sergeant, occasionally honking what are definitely goose profanities. As the sun climbs higher, your headache recedes like a reluctant tide. The crisp air helps, as does the mindless rhythm of counting geese, still 200, minus your pride. By midday, you almost feel human again, or at least human-shaped. The geese, having had their fun, settle into their grazing routine, leaving you to nurse your dignity and plot revenge via tomorrow's egg collection. The afternoon sun bakes the lava fields into a giant geothermal skillet as you begin the delicate task of feather sorting. Inside the dim, musty feather house, mountains of down-await classification, each fluffy tuft destined for a different fate based on quality, size, and stubbornness. You sink your hands into the first pile, sending up a cloud of tiny feathers that stick to your sweaty forearms like nature's confetti. The highest grade comes from the breast plumes so soft they make clouds feel like sandpaper. Historians still argue whether medieval Europeans truly believed these feathers came from mythical down trees, or just played along to avoid admitting they'd been outsmarted by waterfowl. Erik watches from the doorway, clearly offended by this posthumous invasion of privacy. He lets out a disapproving honk every time you handle a feather from his favorite hen. The other geese mill about outside, casting judgmental glances through the open window, their beady eyes tracking your every move like feather quality inspectors. As you work, the village children sneak in to beg for cast-offs. They stuff their pockets with imperfect fluff, destined to become doll bedding or makeshift fishing lures. One particularly enterprising girl constructs tiny feather boats, launching them in the stream to see whose can float the longest before becoming a trout snack. By sunset, your fingers are numb from sorting, your nose tickled by a million tiny barbs, and your hair looks like you lost a fight with a pillow. But the sacks of premium down are packed and labeled. Tomorrow, they'll begin their journey to stuff the beds of European nobility who'll never know they're sleeping on the byproducts of Icelandic goose drama. The northern lights begin their silent dance as you make your final rounds, checking the enclosure gates and counting sleeping geese under the eerie green glow. Erik has claimed his usual perch atop the central rock, one eye open in perpetual vigilance, or possibly just to ensure you don't sneak off without properly securing the latch. Historians still argue whether Icelandic geese actually slept with one eye open, or if this was just an elaborate prank played on visiting scholars. You pause to watch the aurora ripple across the sky like a celestial flag, its reflection shimmering in the dew-covered grass. The geese stir slightly, their soft murmurs blending with the distant gurgle of hot springs, nature's lullaby for creatures who spend their days making your life difficult. Even Erik seems momentarily humbled by the display, his usual scowl softened by the otherworldly light. The cold seeps through your woolens as you lean against the enclosure wall, watching your breath fog in the air. Somewhere in the distance, a fox yips a reminder that the night holds its own dramas beyond human concerns. The geese shift in their sleep, forming tighter feathery mounds against the chill, their synchronized breathing creating gentle waves of movement through the flock. Your eyelids grow heavy as the lights pulse overhead, green fingers stroking the sky. The day's aches, the peck marks, the strained muscles from chasing escapees, the lingering headache from last night's questionable decisions, all fade beneath the aurora's hypnotic sway. Even Erik's final derisive snort, as you turn toward home, can't break the spell of this quiet moment between goose and herder, earth and sky. The turf hut welcomes you with its familiar earthy scent as you duck inside, your body moving through the motions of bedtime by muscle memory. The embers in the hearth still glow faintly, painting the walls with dancing shadows that remind you of the aurora outside. You kick off your boots, one of them landing perfectly in the boot corner, the other knocking over a wooden spoon. You'll pretend you didn't hear clatter across the floor. Your bed beckons, its layers of sheepskins promising warmth, even as they crackle with static electricity when you slide beneath them. Historians still argue whether Icelanders actually slept better on sheepskins or just enjoyed shocking visitors. The roof sod layers muffle the world outside, leaving only the occasional distant honk from the enclosure. Probably Erik complaining about the accommodations to some poor, listening gosling. As you settle in, your mind replays the day's adventures. The storm dodged, the eggs collected, the fox outwitted. The challenges that seemed so monumental in the moment now feel comfortably distant, softened by the knowledge that tomorrow will bring its own chaos, different in details, but familiar in rhythm. The last thing you hear before sleep claims you is the wind whispering across the turf roof, carrying with it the faintest echo of geese murmuring in their dreams. Somewhere out there, the northern lights still dance, the hot springs still bubble, and Iceland continues its ancient routine, with or without your witness. And so we leave you here, nestled in your turf cocoon, the day's trial softened by sleep's approach. The geese are safe, the eggs are counted, and the world outside continues its slow turn toward dawn. Picture the landscape settling into darkness, the steaming hot springs becoming faint glowing eyes in the night, the basalt columns standing like silent sentinels along the valley. The wind plays its endless melody through the grass, occasionally punctuated by a sleepy goose's sigh or the distant crackle of cooling lava rock. There's comfort in this routine, in knowing that when the sun returns, the geese will still honk with unreasonable demands, the foxes will still plot their feathery heists, and the lava fields will still test your balance with every step. Somewhere in Reykjavik, a scribe records the day's feather counts by candlelight. Somewhere in Europe, a nobleman sleeps unknowingly on Icelandic down, dreaming whatever dreams such people dream. But here, in this moment, there's just you and the quiet. The hut creaks softly around you, like a living thing settling its bones. The sheepskins weigh heavy on your limbs, anchoring you to this patch of earth, this slice of history. Outside, the stars watch over a landscape that has changed little in centuries, where humans remain, gloriously outnumbered by geese and geology alike. Let your breathing match the slow rhythm of the sleeping flock outside. Let your thoughts drift like loose feathers on a thermal current. The night is long, but dawn can wait.